At the beginning of the 20th century, when Europe was filled with confidence in progress, science, and rational order, a young philosopher appeared, whose ideas felt disturbingly out of place. Carlo Michelstaedter did not believe that humanity was advancing toward a better life. Instead, he believed that modern people had perfected something far more tragic: the art of avoiding life itself. Michelstaedter's central claim is unsettling in its simplicity. Most people, he argued, do not truly live. They postpone life. They endure the present while telling themselves that meaning will arrive later, after success, after stability, after recognition, after fulfillment. This postponement is not accidental. It is the foundation of how society teaches people to exist. Michelstaedter called this way of living rhetoric. Rhetoric, in his philosophy, is not just persuasive speech or empty language. It is a mode of existence built on justification. A rhetorical life is one that cannot stand on its own. It must constantly explain itself, defend itself, and promise itself. The present moment is never enough. It must be tolerated as a means to something else. From childhood onward, people are trained into rhetorical existence. Childhood is preparation for adulthood. Education prepares us for work. Work prepares us for security. Security prepares us for happiness. Happiness prepares us for a meaningful life that always seems to lie just beyond reach. Life becomes an endless rehearsal for itself, never quite beginning. Michelstaedter saw this as a betrayal of existence. In rhetoric, the individual becomes a project rather than a presence. A person's value is measured by progress, productivity, and improvement. Even moments of success feel strangely hollow because they immediately turn into new expectations. Achievement does not bring rest. It brings pressure. The question is never, "Am I alive?" but "What must I do next?" Rhetoric survives on lack. It needs dissatisfaction to function. If a person were ever fully satisfied, rhetoric would collapse. This is why fulfillment is always temporary. Meaning is always conditional. Life is lived as a means, never as an end. Michelstaedter argued that society depends on this structure. Economic systems require people who feel incomplete. Social hierarchies rely on comparison. Cultural narratives praise sacrifice, discipline, and endurance while promising future reward. Rhetoric keeps people productive and hopeful, but rarely present. What makes rhetoric especially powerful is that it feels reasonable. It disguises itself as responsibility, ambition, and maturity. Those who reject it are often labeled naive or unrealistic. But Michelstaedter insisted that rhetoric is not realism, it is avoidance. That at the center of this avoidance lies fear of death. Michelstaedter believed that mortality silently governs human behavior. Life is fragile, temporary, and uncertain. Rather than confronting this directly, people construct narratives that promise permanence through success, legacy, or meaning. They invest themselves in future achievements, hoping to escape the anxiety of finitude. Rhetoric becomes a psychological shield. It tells people that suffering is justified, that effort will be rewarded, that life will eventually make sense. In exchange, it asks them to surrender the present moment. Most people accept this bargain willingly, believing it is the only way to survive emotionally. But survival is not the same as living. According to Michelstaedter, this is why modern individuals often feel empty despite apparent success. They may be busy, accomplished, and socially approved, yet inwardly restless. They function well within systems, but they do not feel whole. They explain life constantly, but rarely experience it directly. Against rhetoric, Michelstaedter placed its absolute opposite: persuasion. Persuasion is not an argument meant to convince others. It is not a belief system or a philosophy one adopts. It is a way of being in which the individual no longer seeks justification from the outside world. A persuaded person does not ask life, to guarantee meaning or reward. They do not postpone existence in exchange for future promises. They accept life as it is unfinished, unstable, and exposed, and take responsibility for it. This acceptance is not resignation. It is clarity. In Persuasion, the present moment is not endured as a means to an end. It is lived as an end in itself, not because it is comfortable, but because it is real. Why Persuasion is so rare, and why it demands a painful courage that most people cannot sustain, is what we will explore in the next part. In the first part, we saw how rhetoric becomes the dominant way human beings relate to life, how existence is delayed, justified, and defended through future promises. But Carlo Michelstaedter did not stop at exposing this structure. His philosophy moves further into territory that is deeply uncomfortable, because it asks what happens when a person actually sees through rhetoric and can no longer fully believe in it. For Michelstaedter, the greatest barrier to persuasion is not ignorance or lack of intelligence. It is fear, specifically, the fear of standing alone without guarantees. Persuasion demands a radical form of independence, not from society in a practical sense, but from the psychological need to be justified by it. To live persuasively means to stop leaning on borrowed meanings. Most people rely on external structures to feel real. Social roles, careers, moral identities, achievements, and approval all act as psychological supports. They answer the question, "Who am I?" without forcing the individual to confront a more disturbing question. What does it mean to exist when nothing promises meaning in advance? Rhetoric provides ready-made answers. Persuasion removes them. This is why persuasion feels threatening. A persuaded individual no longer depends on recognition, progress, or validation to confirm their existence. They do not measure life by outcomes. They do not postpone being alive until conditions improve. Instead, they accept existence as something that must be carried entirely in the present moment. This kind of independence quietly exposes how much of social life depends on shared illusion, and that exposure unsettles others. Michelstaedter believed persuasion cannot be taught, learned, or gradually achieved. The moment persuasion becomes a goal, it turns back into rhetoric. It cannot be promised as a future state. It only exists when the individual stops demanding reassurance. Persuasion is not attained, it is endured. At the center of this endurance lies death. Unlike philosophies that place death at the end of life, Michelstaedter placed it at life's core. Mortality is not a distant event. It is the condition that gives urgency to every moment. Rhetoric exists largely to hide this fact. It distracts the individual with plans, hopes, and explanations that stretch beyond the present. It whispers that life will eventually make sense, if only one waits long enough. Persuasion refuses this distraction. To live persuasively is to accept death without consolation, not heroically, not romantically, but honestly. It is to recognize that suffering does not guarantee redemption, that effort does not secure meaning, and that existence does not owe us justification. This recognition is not liberating in an emotional sense. It is devastating. Michelstaedter never claimed persuasion brings happiness. Happiness, as commonly understood, is itself a rhetorical promise of future emotional state, dependent on conditions. Persuasion offers no comfort, no reward, and no narrative closure. What it offers instead is truth, the alignment of life with what is, rather than with what is hoped for. This is why most people retreat back into rhetoric after glimpsing persuasion. Rhetoric is soothing. It allows forgetting. It gives pain a purpose and suffering a direction. Michelstaedter did not condemn those who choose rhetoric. He understood that illusion often feels necessary for survival. But he insisted that necessity does not transform illusion into truth. Here we reach the most tragic element of his philosophy. There is no synthesis. Michelstaedter rejected the idea that truth and comfort could be balanced. He did not believe one could live authentically while still relying on rhetorical guarantees. Persuasion and rhetoric are mutually exclusive. To choose one is to abandon the other. Persuasion leads to solitude. Rhetoric leads to belonging, but at the cost of authenticity. This refusal to compromise is what makes Michelstaedter's philosophy so disturbing. It leaves no safe middle ground. Once the illusion is seen, it cannot be unseen. Awareness becomes a burden. The individual must live among promises while knowing they are hollow. Michelstaedter himself lived inside this tension. He was acutely aware of the falsehood of postponed living, and equally aware of how difficult it is to exist without illusion in a world structured entirely around it. His work does not function as a guidebook. It functions as a verdict dot in the modern world. His ideas feel more relevant than ever. Contemporary life is saturated with rhetoric, productivity culture, constant self-improvement, identity construction, and the endless demand to justify one's existence through output and visibility. People are encouraged to optimize themselves for a future that never arrives. Presence becomes secondary. Performance becomes primary. Michelstaedter would say this is rhetoric perfected. The question his philosophy leaves us with is not whether we can escape rhetoric entirely. It is whether we are aware of living inside it. Awareness does not dissolve social systems, but it changes how deeply they control us. Once seen clearly, rhetoric loses some of its authority, even if we continue to participate in it.